A fun weekend. It's always fun. Granted, a very, very different, very unique March Madness approach in here, but it's on. And your team is competing, so I know you jacked up about that. It was a wacky weekend in terms of a lot of teams that had not won conferences. Oregon State never won. They won the Pac-12. Georgetown had a 14-year gap between their last Big East championship. Illinois was like 18 years. I mean, there were some long gaps, and every major conference, Alabama, almost 30 years. So teams were cracking through, and it's going to be nuts. So fill out, I usually say, Tiki, fill out two brackets, one that you really believe in and one where you take a few chances. To hell with it. Just put 5 or 6 out this year because you're not going to do well in any of them.
No, you're not. You have no chance. And you're not going to actually know if your team's going to play.
Yes,
Virginia, you mentioned my Cavaliers who had to withdraw from the ACC tournament, and therefore Georgia Tech went straight to the ACC final after having played one game, which was a tight one against Miami. That was actually on during our show last week.
I remember.
They played one game and then played in the final, and they won. So that's one of those teams, Georgia Tech, you talked about hadn't won in a really long time, and they got a good squad. But it kind of feels, I don't want to say it's not cheap because obviously you got to win, but you play one game and then go to the final? I mean, come on now.
It's different.
It is very, very different. But Virginia, the point I brought this story up, is Virginia, they're not even practicing, not doing anything until Friday. They're basically quarantining in the hopes that the positive test that was in their program doesn't get worse, and they're not going to travel until right before they have to play. So this is going to be an odd – Kansas is doing the same thing, or at least something similar. So this is going to be an odd week for a lot of these teams, and the unpredictability of the NCAA tournament this year is even more heightened. It's not just about the matchups, which are obviously the big issue when you get to the NCAA tournament. It's also just about who's going to be available.
Who's going to be able to plow through. We know what Gonzaga's chasing. They're chasing history, and I gave you a few of the bullet points with the conference oddities, but this really does paint a unique picture. Big 12, Pac-12, SEC, Big 10, ACC, Big East, all of the winners of their conference tournaments. I mentioned Georgetown. That was a 14-year gap. I think I said Illinois, 16 years. Tech, you mentioned 28. Bama, 30. Texas and Oregon State have never won. So, I mean, this is – and by the way, I mentioned Georgetown. How about Patrick Ewing? Because we talked about this last week, and Ewing was a little ticked off, a little tongue-in-cheek, but also serious enough for all of us to react to it. I didn't love the use of the word accosted. I felt like that was a little bit of a misrepresentation of how he was, basically being asked to show his credentials at the Garden, whatever. I'm a big Ewing guy, but I thought that got blown out of proportion. But what a win! What a week for Patrick Ewing at the Garden.
That wasn't even
Patrick Ewing.
The final wasn't even close.
They destroyed him. They were up by 30.
I know. I don't know what that means for the tournament. Are they going to play great? But it's a great way to go into the tournament, feeling good about, really good about yourselves.
They got a good matchup. They're playing. I think that's the Colorado 5-12 matchup.
That's exactly
right. A lot of people
right.
say, like Billis. A lot of people saying Georgetown can win. Haven't seen Colorado play a ton this year.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, though, Georgetown, those guys inside. I mean, and they've got their point guard now too. And they lost. Think about Mac McClung went to Texas Tech. They lost so many players. So I guess, and they've got a 5-star guard coming in next year. I guess the story is, and we've always surmised this. We've talked to him. We've defended him as he was passed over for years by the NBA.
Right.
Patrick Ewing could coach.
Yeah, he definitely can. He can't because he's no nonsense. He tells these guys exactly what they want. Remember last year or 2 years ago it was. The guy was taking
You practiced that shot?
What was
you practiced that shot?
It was like a one-footed three-pointer or whatever it was. One-footed, maybe it was just inside the three-point line. He's like, you practiced that shot? Why are you taking that shot?
Yeah.
But it's true, right? Don't do stupid stuff. And that's why this Hoyas team is so good and consistent, even though they weren't one of the top seeds per se in the Big East.
No.
When it comes down to it, you could trust Patrick Ewing in clutch situations because we saw it, right? In the Big East tournament, the Big East is one of the toughest conferences in basketball. Now, obviously, Villanova was compromised. They'd lost a couple players and things, just like we talk about with all these conferences. But, hats off to Pat, man. That's just awesome because he comes on whenever we ask. He's great. And
I
I'm
love
happy
him.
for
I've always
man.
loved Patrick. I mean, listen, he's one of my all-time favorite players, obviously. Now, at Georgetown, I didn't like him because he was going in beating up my boy Mully a little bit.
That's right.
But I've always been rooting for Patrick because he really has been grinding. A lot of it anonymously, like when Van Gundy was coaching the Rockets, he was working with the big men in Houston. He was doing that in Orlando. Like, the man put his time in because he's a big, and because there's this predisposed belief that bigs can't be good coaches, even though Juwan Howard has disproved that quite quickly. And others along the way. I'm thrilled for Ewing. Obviously, Georgetown's not the lead here, but I wanted to at least get that out before we get buried in everything else. And how about this for you? In a year of oddities, let me make sure I have this right. So Gonzaga, I'm sure this has happened before. I don't recall. People who do research for a living can obviously do it. If you get it, by all means, drop me a tweet. So when you look at their bracket, so Gonzaga's the number 1 overall seed, followed by Baylor, Illinois, and Michigan.
Yep.
In Gonzaga's bracket, the 2, 3, and 4 seed, they've already played and already beaten.
Yeah, and destroyed, by the way.
Well, Iowa's the 2 seed, Kansas 3, and Virginia the 4 seed.
Yeah, and they beat the crap out of us. So, I mean, when I saw our seed, I was like, no. Or our bracket, I should say. I was like, any of the ones.
No confidence, defending champions? Is this the attitude that you emit on national TV?
Yeah.
For the national champion Cavaliers?
Because, BT, in the last
what is that?
5 years, I would say 5 years, that Tony Bennett has been at the elite level, where he's got good talent and he's got these guys playing great defense. Doesn't matter how well they shoot offensively. I have never seen Virginia get manhandled in 5 years. I haven't seen it, right?
Yeah.
Like UMBC that wasn't manhandling. It was like they were just stupid, like efficient from 3-point range. UMBC, They couldn't miss. Talk about one-footed, 3-pointers. Those were going down for UMBC. That game notwithstanding, the Gonzaga just destroyed us earlier in this year, and it just scares me, man. I mean, maybe there'll be an adjustment, but when I saw our bracket, our path, it scares me. Just put it that way.
You know who I listened to, and I've heard him this year. I mean, I've heard him forever. How could you not? Bill Walton.
Yeah.
But I was up late and I was watching the end of that game with Oregon State. Right? He is out of his mind, Bill Walton. And I've always known this.
Was he at least talking about the game?
You know what? He was.
Okay,
I'm certainly. This isn't a rip job. This is just how that man's brain directs, and really his partner, not Pash. Who's he do the? Is it Dave Pash? Generally does it with Pash. Like, you've got to be uniquely wired just to keep up with these ridiculously obscure, sometimes out of place references. It's like, now his defense, it was the Pac-12 championship. He was dialed in. It was about the Beavers. It was about inbound situations. There's some, late game fouling and some inbounding situations that it was obviously a tight game, so they had to handle business at the end. And he was dialed in. But, I mean, have you ever really sat down and listened to Walton do a game for like 20, 30 minutes? It's lunacy.
I heard one earlier in the year, and it was more about, because this is when it was so uncertain about who teams were playing and who was going to be available, and it had nothing to. That's why I asked. It had everything to do with basketball. It had nothing to do with basketball.
Yeah.
It was really about, I don't know, the circumstances surrounding the teams and where they're from and where they flew from, and what the pilot probably said on the plane. Like, it was. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, the action is happening, and he's talking about nothing involving the game. And I guess if you turn off the sound, or you're not necessarily interested in commentating on what just happened and just watching the game and then being entertained by him, it was okay. But if you're looking to figure out what's going on the court from the analyst, you weren't getting that at all. That's why I asked.
No, he's the most unique mind in sports. It's crazy, and I enjoyed it. That's not me. And I haven't always enjoyed his work because he gets in the way of sometimes what you really want to watch. But when I flipped on the end of the game on Saturday night and I was watching the Pac-12 championship, he was on point. All right, so let's get this out of the way now, Tiki. You and I have been doing this for a while, right? Where not only the show together, but also what I'm going to tell everybody now. How many times, I every day I get this stuff where, and, the good stuff you take in, you're certainly appreciative of it, you enjoy it, it's great, I might hit you back. But it's the stuff that, I love the dissenting views. I love the contrarians. And don't get me wrong, without fans, you probably don't have much of a, like, you need fans. Otherwise, you probably have some fans. But to me, like, to have voices that really resolutely disagree, that's what I love about this business. And because it's March Madness, right? this is our chance to give you those dissenting voices, those voices that love to pop off anonymously. Some of you have even finally got rid of the eggshell avatar. You put your own face there or the face of somebody else. You've got your cute little sayings. You're not hiding, which we do appreciate. But Tiki and I will put together, and we've already started this. It's on Instagram. It's on Twitter, all social media outlets here. Whoever has the best score, whoever does the best on the bracket, comes in and not comes in because we're still doing this the way we're doing it. But in previous years, we've actually had winners come to studio. Whoever wins, whoever gets the most points for the bracket, comes and hosts and hangs out with us for a little bit. Yeah. How's that sound, Teke?
Yeah, we love that. It's fun, especially because you get basketball fans who know what they're talking about. So, or just sports fans who know what they're talking about. Maybe they get lucky with their bracket because I think, honestly, that's just the only way to go.
You think so?
You just can't rationalize, your NCAA bracket. I mean, you can.
You mean this year or in general?
Especially this year, but
years
in
past,
general,
I would disagree. In years past, you definitely could. I'm not saying you're going to win, but you can definitely rationalize.
True, but at some point, there's always an emotional, I don't know, like something emotional takes you away from what you should do.
Yeah.
And so
meaning what? You saw this team play and it
exactly.
stuck. Yeah, that's true.
Exactly.
There's biases that
there's biases that influence what's going to happen. Well, plus, it's all matchups. And so this year in particular, it's going to be somebody who gets lucky, I think.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell to be notified when we drop fresh content.